Con motivo a las primarias, cuales se llevarán a cabo el día 26 de abril de este año, WLCH Radio Centro y Telecentro han producido unos segmentos especiales titulados Camino a las Primarias de Pensilvania, y este año se va a elegir un senador federal del estado de Pensilvania. El actual senador, el señor Pat Toomey, republicano, se ha postulado para la reelección y no tiene contrincantes en la primaria de abril. Por el Partido Demócrata hay 3 personas intentando ser seleccionados para retar al señor Toomey. Esperamos entrevistar antes de las elecciones de noviembre al señor Toomey y su retador demócrata. Hemos pregrabado a 3 candidatos demócratas y le hemos hecho a todos las mismas preguntas. Hoy tenemos el alcalde de la ciudad de Braddock, Pensilvania, el señor John Fetterman. Su esposa, Gabrielle, servirá como intérprete para la entrevista. With the upcoming Pennsylvania primary that will be held on April 26, WLCH Radio Centro and Telecentro have produced some segments titled Road to the Pennsylvania Primary. This year, Pennsylvania will elect a senator, and Pennsylvania's Senator Pat Toomey is seeking re-election and has no other Republican challengers. Now, there are 3 Democrats vying to be the Democratic challenger against Senator Toomey. We have pre-recorded interviews with each of the Democratic candidates. Each has been asked the same series of questions. We expect that before the November election, we can interview Senator Toomey and whomever may be the Democratic challenger. And today we present Mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania, John Fetterman. His wife, Gabrielle, will serve as an interpreter during this interview. And for the first question, can you provide a brief background about yourself and why do you want to run for the U.S. Senate? Primeramente, queremos saber un poco de usted y por qué aspira a ser senador del estado de Pensilvania.
46 years old. I'm married and I have 3 children. Actually, today, the 15th, is my son's 7th birthday.
Ah, okay.
So we're doing a little bit of that today. And I'm married to, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I'm married to my wife, Giselle, who's Brazilian. And she was brought to this country when she was 9 by her mother. You know, they were just looking for a better life here in this country. And I, for the last 14 years, have been living and working in a town called Braddock, Pennsylvania. And, you know, Braddock is a poor community, but we are working on building our way back. And I really have been a champion for that community for the last 11 years that I've been mayor. And in part, I'm running to be a senator to be a champion for a lot of the forgotten cities here across the state. So, you know, it's my belief that every community needs a champion. And there's so many different communities across Pennsylvania that have been left behind. Their best days are a generation ago. That they need somebody in the U.S. Senate that remembers that, knows that, and has achieved success in a community just like that.
For the urban areas that are in decay in Pennsylvania and around the U.S., how do we create a viable future for them to progress and create economic development activities? Para nuestras áreas urbanas en Pensilvania y a través de Estados Unidos que carecen de crecimiento económico, ¿cómo podemos crear un futuro viable donde se pueda promover el progreso y desarrollo económico?
That is perhaps the single largest challenge facing Pennsylvania is what can you do for communities that have just been allowed to deteriorate? And the key to that is an understanding and awareness, A, of the problem, and B, the knowledge that private dollars will never follow public dollars. We as a society have to find the appropriate resources to invest in these communities. And I know that from a firsthand basis that public dollars have jump-started private investments in my community, even a community like my own, like Braddock, which was largely written off by a lot of people. And if you're living in Johnstown, or you're living in Erie, or you're living in Monessen, or you're living in Chester, or you're living in Steeltown, all of these communities, you know, their best days were a generation ago, you'll ask folks. And the only way that's going to change is if we as a government continually provide resources to reinvest in those communities that will drive private investment, and that will encourage residents to stay that we're considering leaving, and encourage people to move there and be a part of that town's renaissance.
Él dice que ciudades como nuestra y como Reading y esas ciudades más viejas de Pennsylvania que muchas personas lo he olvidado y no ha cuidado de esas ciudades, necesitan alguien que va a luchar por ellas y él quiere luchar para el estado entero.
How do we protect the U.S. from individuals and organizations that are intent on harming us? ¿Cómo podemos proteger a los Estados Unidos de individuos y organizaciones que tienen como objeto crearnos mal?
Well, sure. I'm assuming you're talking about ISIS and those other groups. Well, I think the most important thing to do is that we don't make the situation any worse and more challenging than it is. There isn't anybody out there in the current political landscape on either side that thinks the Iraq War was a good choice. It was a catastrophic decision, both on a humanitarian scale, but on a financial scale, and our country has yet to fully recover from that catastrophic decision. So I think the first thing that we can do to protect ourselves from that is to avoid this rush from a lot of politicians that are like, let's go bomb the hell out of them, or let's carpet bomb them, or anything, because that strategy hasn't worked. You can't mention one decision that's been made in the Middle East that has made our country safer when it comes to that. Two, we have to acknowledge that we have to sometimes negotiate, and we have to have relationships with rogue states that, quite frankly, aren't trustworthy, like, say, Iran. Mm-hmm. You look at Syria. Syria is a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It's a proxy war between us and Russia, and it's not going to be solved unless we get in and negotiate with countries that, quite frankly, don't have a great history of being our ally or being truthful or being upfront. So, again, it's a multi-pronged approach. I think President Obama has done a really good job of containing ISIS and attacking ISIS, but I would be very, very slow, if at all, to ever endorse another wholesale military invention on the scale of, say, the Iraqi invasion, because it has not made our community and our nation any safer. In fact, it had the exact opposite effect. And those that are waging this war very rarely, if ever, have the actual skin in the game. And it's young men and women from poor and working class families are the ones that are getting sent over there. And we need a new way of looking at it. And I think restraint is the new strength for the years ahead.
Lo importante es practicar como resistencia. No es inmediatamente entrar en una nueva guerra con todas esas cosas. El problema de Irak, lo que dice que normalmente son jóvenes de ciudades pobres como la nuestra que son mandados a esas guerras, que mueren, que tiene que pensar en toda la información que hay antes de hacer una decisión de entrar en otra guerra desastrosa como Irak ha sido.
What are the major environmental issues facing Pennsylvania? ¿Cuáles son los mayores problemas ambientales que confronta Pennsylvania?
Well, I think the major environmental issues are ones that are driven by inequality, for example. Depending on what zip code you live, you have a much higher chance of having unsafe drinking water. Depending on what zip code you live in, you have a much higher chance of breathing air that can induce asthma and other health conditions. If you live in the wrong zip code, you are more likely to live near or around contaminated soil from past industrial legacies. So I think those are significant issues that are facing Pennsylvania and a lot of former industrial states. If you look at the crisis in Flint, Michigan, for example, that's a prime example of a real environmental hazard that, A, no one really saw coming, and B, was exacerbated by this austerity measure that now is going to end up costing people over $1 billion to rectify after poisoning children the way they did. And in Pennsylvania, there's another set of challenges that were brought about through fracking, whether that's groundwater contamination, whether that's wells exploding. And that was a failure, again, on one of my opponents' part, Katie McGinty, when she was an environmental secretary under Ed Rendell. they never imparted the necessary environmental regulations, nor did they impose an extraction tax, which could help pay for more stringent environmental regulations and inspectors, as well as also could fund public education, which is woefully inadequate in the state as well too.
Que muchos problemas en el estado es que no es cierto que donde usted nace, el zip code de tu ciudad como define su vida, que no es cierto, no puede ser así, no es porque usted es parte de una ciudad que es pobre, que el camino de su vida no va a ser bueno como de otras personas que nacen en una ciudad que tiene más resources, como los problemas de agua, polución, problemas del environment, que todos estos problemas no es cierto. Todos naciendo en América merecen la misma chance a llegar al sueño americano. Y él dice que problemas de environment como de fracking, una persona que está en el race contra él fue parte de estas negociaciones de environment y no fueron hechas con responsabilidad.
How do we create a functional immigration system for the U.S.? And what do we do with the approximately 11 million individuals who are currently undocumented? ¿Cómo se crea en Estados Unidos un sistema de inmigración que tenga un buen funcionamiento? ¿Qué se debe de hacer con los 11 millones de personas residiendo en Estados Unidos y considerados indocumentados?
No way we're not going to fix it. We're not going to give in to the nasty rhetoric and hateful speech coming from a lot of the Republican presidential contenders. This idea that Mexicans are rapists or we're all drug dealers, or just this terrible rhetoric that is coming from the Republican Party is really unfortunate, and that has to stop. We have immigrants in this country that have come here simply searching for a better life, and that's my family's immigration story. One of the things that I say on the campaign trail is that Pat Toomey's ancestors were pro-immigration. What happened to him? And then we also have to acknowledge that we as Americans and as Pennsylvanians, we all came from a boat somewhere. And this idea that we need to treat people that have come into this country like second or third class citizens or demagoguery or things of that nature are also unacceptable. Just like my wife's family, they paid their taxes. They didn't break any laws. They came here looking for a better life, and that's what they found. And that is the overwhelming majority of people that are living here in this country undocumented, and we need to create a path to legalization and citizenship for those individuals that have played by the rules, but for coming into this country in an undocumented manner.
Él dice que la solución para inmigración es quedar bien lejos de los republicanos y las cosas que están diciendo y hablando de inmigrantes, que son cosas terribles, que como mi historia, los inmigrantes aquí solo están aquí porque quieren un futuro mejor. Mi mamá un día dice que estaba teniendo una conversación con mi tía, y mi tía dice que este año solo fue 7 veces que nosotros fuimos robbed. Y que triste, que ella no quería que eso fuera normal para mí. Entonces nosotros viemos para América y con nada, con un suitcase, sin hablar inglés, sin conocer a nadie, y empezamos del cero. Y los inmigrantes aquí, esta es la historia más representante de un inmigrante en América. Solo estamos aquí procurando un camino mejor y que merece compasión y para encontrar un camino mejor, no las cosas que los republicanos están hablando de los inmigrantes.
There is a strong belief that there is a school-to-prison pipeline for many Black and Latino kids in the United States. Do you agree? And if so, what policies should we develop that create pathways for success? Hay una fuerte creencia de que existe un puente de escuela a prisión para muchos adolescentes afroamericanos y latinos. ¿Cree usted que eso es verdad? Y si es verdad, ¿qué estrategias se deben de desarrollar para crear caminos de éxito para estos jóvenes?
Well, I have a unique set of experiences when it comes to the prison, the school to prison pipeline, is because I got my start 20 years ago teaching GED classes, and that's where that pipeline begins. Is that they either are expelled from school or they quit school because it's just not the kind of supportive environment, nor are they receiving the kind of support that they need at home. And I have literally helped hundreds and hundreds of young people, predominantly people of color, get their high school diplomas. And that is the first step, is that what happens if they are unable to complete school is, do we have enough resources dedicated into helping adult learners get their GEDs? Because that has a profound impact over the earning potential of that individual over the course of their lifetime, but it also freezes them out without it from any kind of higher education, whether that's barber school, whether that's community college, or whether that's a trade school. So first and foremost, given that we are going to have dropouts, we have to have an adequate response for adult education. And again, no one has greater experience in that than I do. Second of all, we have to fix our funding formula crisis that we have in Pennsylvania. If you live in the right zip code, like say Mount Lebanon in Allegheny County, where I'm at, you go to the best public high school in this state. But if you live in the wrong zip code, like myself, so to speak, wrong, you go to one of the most challenged public schools. And those places with the quote-unquote wrong zip code are the ones that are having the greatest problem, and that's because of just a lack of resources and a lack of parity, because we have such a stilted funding formula for the state as a whole. And again, thirdly, you have to have an appropriate policing response as well too, where we're not locking up young people for marijuana or for trivial issues, and arrest and incarceration is viewed as the last possible outcome, not something that we're actively pursuing or courting. And again, I have experience in all of those as head of a police department, as mayor of my community, whether as a GED instructor, and as an observer of what can happen if young people aren't given the appropriate levels of support, both educationally and structurally and socially, in order to make a transition into productive adulthood.
Él dice que tiene que mirar de tres maneras. Pero primero es estos jóvenes que están saliendo de la escuela, que no están acabando la escuela. Las chances de ellos tener un futuro es casi imposible. No pueden hacer ningún tipo de escuela como trade school para estudiar, para ser un barber. No puede hacer nada de eso si no tiene un GED. Y él empezó el trabajo del Embradoc enseñando a jóvenes para pasar el GED classes, el equivalente de la high school. Y que tiene que haber suficientes programas para soportar a estos niños, a estos jóvenes, porque sin esta oportunidad es cuando los problemas existen. Ellos van a encontrar otras maneras de hacer dinero, maneras ilegales, maneras que no son productivas. También dice que problemas como legalización de marihuana causa muchos problemas en ciudades, mayoría ciudades de minoridades como la nuestra. Tiene que haber un approach mejor para esto. Y el tercero, estoy pensando, él dice legalización de marihuana, dice prisión, y el tercero, ¿cuál fue? What was the third prong, sweetheart, that you said? You said prison, marijuana, y policía. Tiene que haber una comunicación mejor entre la policía y los moradores de una ciudad para ver que están trabajando juntos. Se ve problemas como, ha pasado en Baltimore, cuando no hay esta comunicación y este respeto entre los residents y la policía.
For many individuals, higher education is a necessity for pursuing a professional or technical career, yet the burdensome debt that they encounter has become an obstacle in achieving their aspirations. Is there anything that should be done to alleviate this dilemma? Para muchos individuos, la educación universitaria es una necesidad para tener una carrera profesional o técnica, pero el alto costo y la deuda que resulta de sus estudios se ha convertido en un obstáculo para estas personas lograr sus metas. ¿Hay algo que se puede hacer para aliviar esta situación?
First, we have to clamp down and really do our best to eliminate a lot of these for-profit schools. The for-profit schools, the ones that are just reputable, they account for about 12 to 13% of the student loans that are given, but over half the number of defaults. So right then and there, that's creating its own small crisis because they prey on low-income students, students coming from communities where the path and the pipeline to college is less secure and clear, and getting rid of that, getting their lobbying dollars out of it, and really closing down as many of them as possible because they serve no purpose other than to enrich their for-profit shareholders and employees. Second of all, is certainly in Pennsylvania, we need to move towards a low to no cost public college education. We in this country need to rethink the model. It was revolutionary at one point in time to consider middle school and then high school education as part of a basic level of education for every student. And we have to begin to look at it now as like, okay, for those students that are inclined and are able to go to college, we need to make that as affordable as possible. And as everybody knows, our state school systems are, I believe they're the most expensive in the United States. Thirdly, we need to allow students to refinance their student loan debt the way you can refinance your mortgage. The fact that that's not available or that's not allowed is criminal. The fact that our government produces about $50 billion a year in profit, right there is indicative of just how expensive and how needlessly expensive student loan debt is as a whole as well too. And thirdly, we need to create more quality manufacturing jobs and career jobs that pay $15 an hour or more, where there isn't such a pressure or a race to get to college for some students that aren't able to, and they're able to, get a quality job that has a career path that, guarantees them, secure footing in the middle classes as well too. And those are the things that I think are the most crucial ones when you're talking about young people and their decision whether or not to go to college based on their debt load.
Él dice que el primer problema son las escuelas for profit, que ellos tienen el mayor número de loans, pero también el mayor número de defaults, donde los niños, los jóvenes enroll, pero no acaban y no pueden pagar. Que educación pública de universidad debía ser gratis o un precio bien más bajo. Es importante que todos los jóvenes tienen oportunidad de ir a la universidad si quieren, sin contar de qué zip code está venido, que parece que Pennsylvania es el más caro para public education de universidad. Y también la opción para alumnos, para estudiantes de refinance los loans de escuela, que tiene que ser un programa mejor para esto, y investir en trabajos de manufacturing para una persona que no va a estudiar en la universidad, para tener la oportunidad de tener un trabajo que pueden criar una familia y hijos también.
What should the federal government's role be in guaranteeing health care for all Americans? ¿Qué papel debe de jugar el gobierno federal en garantizar seguro médico a todos los americanos?
Well, the government has always played a role in making sure that the basic civil rights and economic rights of every citizen are protected. And when it comes to health care, the Affordable Care Act was a really important step towards realizing that, as I believe anyway, that health care is a basic fundamental right for every citizen, and it shouldn't be treated as a luxury or something that you should get if you are above a certain income gap or income group. I believe healthcare is a fundamental right, as is education, as is freedom from all kinds of want like that. And given that, we need to evolve and move towards protecting the Affordable Care Act, closing those gaps. Every state in this country should have expanded Medicaid, Medicaid for everybody, and the fact that we let Republican governors and have Republican governors denying people basic access to health care strictly on a nasty partisan rationale is really unacceptable. I don't know why anybody in this country has a vested interest in denying, citizens just access to basic health care. Unfortunately, we don't have equal health care in this country, but we should have at least minimum access to health care for every citizen. The Affordable Care Act was a great first step. Medicaid expansion is another good step, and I'd love to see a single-payer option, come down the road where we join other civilized, industrialized Western countries in providing quality, comprehensive health care for everybody. Medicare for all. I mean, it works. The program works beautifully for older Americans. Why can't it work for Americans, all Americans? And I support Bernie Sanders in that role.
Que el Affordable Care Act fue un gran suceso para América, que healthcare es un derecho fundamental, como educación es también, no es una opción, es un derecho. Quiere ser Medicaid, para gobernadores republicanos no denying healthcare, derechos de salud para personas es criminal, y que le gustaría ver single payer down the road para hacer develop más, que soporta Bernie Sanders en esa visión de single payer healthcare.
Finally, again, could you remind the Democratic voters why they should select you as their senator in April? Finalmente, déjanos saber por qué los votantes demócratas deben seleccionarle a usted como el senador en las primarias de abril.
Well, I'm all set. I'd much rather pass you over to Giselle, and she can, again, talk about more her story and talk about my race. She's been by my side now for 8 years, and she's the best part of me. She's the best part of our family, and I would much rather have her voice than mine in the last 2 minutes.
All righty.
Okay.
Qué lindo, él me ama. Porque es finalmente alguien que es una persona de verdad que está corriendo, pero no esto, pero una persona que tiene la experiencia, pero la compasión para ver personas dónde están, en qué parte de vida, que he pasado los últimos casi 20 años trabajando para mejorar las vidas de personas. Y yo soy muy orgullosa de él como inmigrante, como una inmigrante que vivió ilegal, undocumented, por más de 10 años en América. Y como él luchó por mis derechos y como lucha para las personas de mi ciudad todo el día. I'm very proud of him.
Thank you, Mr. Fetterman. No se olviden que las primarias en Pensilvania se llevarán a cabo el día 26 de abril. Este segmento titulado Camino a las Primarias de Pensilvania ha sido una producción especial de LCH, Radio Centro y Telecentro.